name is Debasis Bhattacharya. I'm a faculty member at the University of Hawaii. And I was given about 10 minutes to talk, which is not a lot to talk about AI and what I do, but you know, I'm here for a couple of days. I'm also going to high-tech to catch me up with this. This is really about application of AI in a classroom. But I just want to let you know that I've actually been using AI tools and all that for quite a while. NVIDIA, for example, had an academic program where they had image recognition and things like that about 5 years ago. So I was doing image recognition, content analysis, and all this kind of stuff for a while. And then, you know, we had this ChatGPT thing come around, and so this is really about what I've been doing for the last few months. Okay?
Sorry, it's me.
So this is a very focused talk about using AI tools. And before I start putting it in context, how many of you actually teach programming classes? Quite a few. Okay. Introductory programming classes like Python, JavaScript? Okay, quite a bit. And how many teach things like server-side programming, like Node.js, Express? All right. So just to put this in context, I teach database design, I teach database programming, I teach an introductory course on HTML, CSS, JavaScript, and an advanced or intermediate class in programming. I've been doing this for about 10 years or so. I've used all sorts of tools for the course, and you know, I heard of ChatGPT 2, Mark 1 I did hear off, and I didn't think much of ChatGPT 3 until it came out, until the buzz came out. So somewhat of a cynical person when things come around. I don't fall for the hype right away. But as you know, I've been working on machine learning and all that for a while, but I wasn't terribly familiar with this conversational model at least a few months ago. So to put the time frame, I heard about ChatGPT and these tools in January of this year, but I really didn't start using it until a little later. So how many of you actually use ChatGPT? I mean, logged in? Most of you. That's good. How many of you have actually generated code with ChatGPT? Oh, yeah, that's even better. How many of you have tested the code that was generated? Okay, so what I did was, I took my final exam from last year. I ran the questions to ChatGPT. Any of you could have done that, right? And it gave 100% correct answers. I mean, really 100%. And you know, and so then I was like, what do I do now? So let me give you some examples. And with all you programming gurus here, you can probably figure it out. So my question was something like, is there a list open? So the top part is the question I generally give. I give very specific. I just give very specific instructions, right? So that people can know what to do. So right on top was the question, and then this is the answer code, right? This is my answer. But anyway, this is ChatGPT's canned response, which is exactly correct. And so anybody who gave this answer will get a full points, right? Without knowing a single line of HTML or anything. Okay. I teach MongoDB, Mongoose schema. You don't have to know anything. You don't have to know what Mongoose is. But if you know how to use ChatGPT 3.5, you will get an answer. This is the official answer, and this is the real answer, which is, well, except for a little more syntax, which is actually better syntax. It works exactly the same. Okay. So for the point I'm making is for questions like this in an exam, it gave answers that was worked just fine. Now I'm not saying that this makes it a very good programming generator. I'm just saying the questions that I tested students in the end of my course, it gave the right answer. So basically, in March of this year, I realized that my final exam could have been done by anybody. Anybody didn't matter that took my class. Okay, so what do you do? Do you ban ChatGPT from your question, Mark?
No.
It wouldn't work. So what I did was I essentially introduced ChatGPT in the classroom, and at that time I was using ChatGPT as is. I'll tell you a little bit about what I'm going to do next semester, but it was just the 3.5 version. So what I did in the rest of the semester was I first of all replaced my long instructions to install software like MongoDB and all that with ChatGPT's instructions. Okay, and so it was like complementary to my instructions. The other thing I did was I made students understand code that I gave them. So you can, for example, you can type in or give a code block and then just write a prompt that says explain this code. So I gave them a version of my explanation, and then they ran ChatGPT if they didn't understand something. They used ChatGPT to find bugs. They find bugs and errors, right? So there were a few ways in which ChatGPT was already used as an assistant or an extension. So the final exam. So given my preview of the previous final exam, in this year I have open book final exams, right? And I want to keep the same. Students are allowed to prepare for the exam using anything, including ChatGPT. They had access to ChatGPT during the exam, right? But at least on paper, I told them you couldn't cut and paste code from there. Now, whether they did that or not was another thing. I prepared my questions in a way in which I was not too specific in my instructions. Right? If you're too specific, you will get specific answers. So I used generic words, I used images as much as possible, and then I tried to slow it down. And of course, my exams are timed. I mean, there's like 90 minutes worth. So I think the idea was not to stop cheating or prevent cheating, was to make sure that the students actually did as much of the work as possible. Okay, so for example, you can't put an image into a ChatGPT. So I used a few of these techniques at least to have the students answer or write code on their own. Okay. Now this slide here is how version 3.5 and 4.0 works. I pay for 4.0, but all students use 3.5. Okay. And they actually learn to write clear or learn coding or learn how to write concise prompts. So the way I teach students is that first of all you need to have a context for what you're trying to code, right? I'm trying to create a database that has 3 tables and so many fields. If you specify the table names, if you specify a few attributes, and then ask ChatGPT to generate a schema, it'll generate a schema field. So the more specific you are, the more context you get, the better the quality of the code is, right? So to some extent, I'll actually teach students to write prompts and to interact with ChatGPT in a better way. And this is something new for the students. They're used to like cutting and pasting or asking keywords in Google search. It's not the same thing as conversing with a tool like this, right? So there's a little different way of teaching how to work with a tool like this for coding, which is a little new. It's more like prompts, or how you set the context, and then how specifically you ask for code to be generated. That's what I did this semester. We also check for bugs in codes. We for example, if a student wrote code, they used to swap code and check each other's code out. Okay. ChatGPT 4.0 is what I paid for. It costs $20 a month, and it's just a better model, but it's also limited. So I don't think there was much of a difference in these two versions for programming. Okay. This is the website. I think all of you know that. I mean, you can pick one or the other. I think we had this demo at lunchtime, so most of you know how this works. And all you have to do is you have to write some comments at the beginning of at the top. You want to see the comments at the top? Mm-hmm. Somewhat. So it just says create JavaScript code for volume of a sphere, which is it's a trivial example. And then what this does is it generates the code down there. And what's come around, what's really what we're talking about is this pair programming called Copilot. And first of all, Copilot is free for all faculty members and students. Okay, so what Copilot does is, and it's called GitHub Copilot, but it essentially works on many IDEs, including Visual Studio Code, to do this kind of stuff. So if you just read through it, you'll see that it gives coding suggestions, right? So the same comments that I wrote up there can be inserted in Visual Studio Code like this. Okay? So the thing great. So the whole idea is that you're writing natural language code, you're writing pseudocode to generate code. Okay, to generate a function. And within a function you can write pseudocode to do more code within functions. So this thing works right now. And while this might be a trivial function, right? I mean, this code from line 7 to 11 was generated based on the comments above. Okay, and you're literally typing natural language, and then you're hitting tab to accept the prompt, accept or not accept, and then it generates the code below it. Okay, and then it also generates other things, how you want to run it and stuff like that. Now again, this is something that you all should use probably as soon as you can. It's all free. And what you do need is a GitHub account, and you need access to Copilot, which is free. Again, it's free for academics. Let's see. So, how do you actually use a tool like this? I see it in two ways. One is, let's take the introductory class, and I'm sure a lot of you teach that. So you have students who come in without knowing anything, any HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, right? So I would, at least my opinion is, I would definitely not give them this tool on week 1. Whether they have access to it is another subject. So you teach them what an IDE is, you make them write code by hand, all these good old-fashioned techniques. But I think there'll come a point in your semester, maybe week 8 or whatever, where you want them to write pseudocode, where you want them to, where they're comfortable with expecting some code generator to write code and recognize what it is, right? That's a little different level of sophistication. So when they know what the code generator is generating, or have a better idea of the syntax, then I think this becomes a little more appropriate. So what I did this semester, and right now this generation is integrated in IDEs, integrated with various IDEs, including Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to use Visual Studio Code, but you don't have to use this IDE. But what it does is it allows students to flush out their specs, flush out their ideas about the code, which is a good habit anyway. You're going to design what you're going to do first, right? Lay it out, and then generate the code, and then test the code. Okay. So for me, what I'm going to do is I'm going to raise the bar in terms of the assignments for trivial things like volume of a sphere, and make them both write the design of the code, generate the code, and the test scripts for it. And also have team projects so that they can work with each other on codes like this. So this is for the introductory class. For the intermediate programming class, right, that already has a prerequisite for the introductory class. I would introduce this a little earlier than the introductory class. So for those students, they are used to at least the basics of JavaScript and things like that. They know some basic programming. So for them, writing APIs or writing database schemas or writing things like that, the student is a better assistant. So that's my plan. A lot of this is work in progress. This is a new tool. I am kind of like treading water and making sure I understand what it is. This is what I have so far. Because all the students know about this already. So it's not like they don't know that this generates code. So the question is, how do we as instructors work with students who already have knowledge of this, but maybe misusing this tool to write code? So I'm more like, I consider more of myself as a facilitator of how this technology can be used, as opposed to being an abstraction point. I would caution students who are absolutely new to programming to using this code generator. I mean, we've had code generators in the past, by the way. I've been programming for a long time. There's been a lot of things where you could drag blocks and generate code. And we had the same issues. We didn't know what the underlying code was and why this putting a block here to this or that. So there's some similarities. Zero GPT is a tool that was created by a Princeton undergraduate student on a Christmas break, supposedly to spot code generation. I am very cynical about whether that works or not. In the past, I have spotted code plagiarism by identifying code from the web that existed in the web, Stack Overflow and things like that. But this is not how this tool works. I am not on the prowl for finding anti-plagiarism tools here. I want students to use this tool productively. I mean, that's my goal. Maybe next time in Columbus State I can talk about anti-plagiarism. But right now I don't even know how to use this tool or teach this tool properly. It's a little ahead. There's one point I need to make though. ChatGPT version 4 is at least from what I heard from the CEO of OpenAI, going to be the last big time learning model. So this uses a specialized learning model called Codex, which has been created just for programming languages, and it's supposedly good for Python scripting. I haven't tested this on just the marketing materials, but what is happening now is based on the GPT 3.5, there are finer tune or finer extension of the training for specialized models. Like it could be for finance, it could be for automotive. There are many fields where this knowledge base is extremely helpful, medical law and things like that. So supposedly the model that powers this Copilot is Codex. So you can search that. Search for Codex and you learn about exactly what it does. Good metrics, but yes, I included in the syllabus. You were allowed to use it in the final exam and all this kind of stuff. I didn't want to hide it or I didn't want to pretend that it didn't exist. But I'm kind of new to writing prompts for code myself. But I'm not new to writing, pseudocode or writing specifications. We've all done that. So what I want to do include in my curriculum from going forward is writing more specs and more of the design of code. And then also emphasizing testing of code. So in the middle you have the code generation part, but I'm going to emphasize the design of code as well as the test and integration of code as well. Because then you have the full package, design, write/generate, test and integrate. So that would be the curriculum. Right now, all I have is mostly code writing. That's what I've been doing in the past, without integration testing and release and things like that. So it gives me a much more scope of work. So this is where we get into the speculation fields. ChatGPT would do anything and everything a few months ago. They've tied down a lot of things that it doesn't do. I'm not really interested in teaching large learning models to students in my programming classes. I'm very specific about using any model. It so happens to be Codex as a programming assistant in an IDE. Okay, so I stay away from all these things that ChatGPT can do or not do. Having said that, in a cybersecurity class, I haven't used it yet, but there's a lot of policies and procedures and hype about what it does and it doesn't do. So there's another tool I found out today called Claude version 2, which also does code generation. So there's going to be many options, and there'll be somebody who probably writing those codes. I mean, this company is not the end all of learning models, right? So that'll be competition.